Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Managing Accountability, Expecting and Getting Top Performance, presented by Rick Lepsinger. Today's webinar will be about an hour, and it's sponsored by the Negotiating Style Profile. As a trainer, you can help individuals to develop their collaborative negotiating skills through thought, preparation, and skill practice. The Negotiating Style Profile offers a simple framework for determining one's negotiating style and the likely effect it has in negotiating situations. My name is Sarah Schaefer, and I will moderate today's webinar. If you have any questions throughout, please type them into the questions box. We will be answering these as they come in live at the end of the presentation or as a follow-up by email if we do run out of time. Virtual team expert with more than 30 years experience and a proven track record as a human resource consultant and executive, Rick Lepsinger is the president of OnPoint Consulting. He is the co-author of several books on leadership and organizational effectiveness, including Closing the Executive Gap, How Great Leaders and Their Companies Get Results, and Virtual Team Success, a practical guide for working and leading from a distance. Welcome, Rick, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Sarah, thanks very much. It's glad to be here. And welcome, everyone. I'm glad you could join us for today's session. So today's topic is managing accountability, and we'll talk a little bit about what you can do to better manage the accountability of others in your organization. In my work with organizations over the last 20 years or so, I've noted, and I'm sure some of you have as well, that there are some companies, there are some teams, and there are some leaders that are just much better at consistently getting things done. They're much better at being able to execute on key initiatives and plans. And we wanted to understand what differentiated the best from the rest and what exactly is it that they do. So in our study of about 408 companies, which is the basis of my book, Closing the Execution Gap, we identified 5 key competencies that really were the differentiators, and managing accountability, expecting and getting top performance was one of those key differentiators. So today's session, we'll talk a little bit about what does it take to manage accountability. We'll spend a little bit of time defining it and giving you some tools to be able to recognize and measure it. We'll talk about the factors that impact individual accountability and why some people tend to take accountability and why some people don't, and what you can do to enhance people's willingness to take accountability and responsibility for results. So let's just start off with a polling question, and I'll kind of open this up just to get your opinion. I have 2 of them at the opening that I'd like to ask. In your organization, to what extent are employees held accountable for results? So we'll open up that polling question, and please take a moment to select the response that best reflects that in your organization. And we have quite a few people on today's call, so let's see if we can get a nice percent of people and see what we have here. Okay, we've got about 70% there. I'll close the poll now, and we'll just see where we are with things. So here are the results. It looks like the majority, well, not the majority, but about 35% are on to a moderate extent, and then a total of about 38% are to a large or very large extent. And then we do have a few folks, about 27%, that are in a small to a small extent. So let's just keep that in mind in terms of where we are with things. So let me just move on to the next question, and we'll show you that next polling question. And here, in your organization, to what extent do managers deal with performance problems in a timely manner? Right, so this is a slightly different question. Let's see what your thoughts are related to that. So to what extent do managers deal with performance problems? All right, and we'll show you this in a moment. We're getting a slightly different profile here. Okay, we've got about 72 or so %. We'll close that poll. You've got to be fast. Let's see the results. So this skewed just a little bit differently, right? You can see that this is more, you've got a similar percentage on the moderate, but slightly higher on to a small extent or to a very small extent, okay? So let's talk a little bit about the implication of that going forward. And it's really about why accountability matters in general. So in general, in our study, 77% of leaders in the top performing companies reported that employees at all levels are held accountable for results. And that's compared to 44% in the less successful organizations. Now, we, of course, are just a group of strangers, but if we were taking this survey in a company, you'd get a general profile of where you folks are. The second part of that is that we talked to 935 leaders, and according to their perspective, only 45% believe that managers in their organizations effectively deal with poor performers. And just for what it's worth, you know, in the behavioral science side of things, these two questions end up, the responses are very, very predictable. Almost everyone says employees at all levels are held accountable, and they certainly say, I'm held accountable. But when asked if managers deal with poor performers, that tends to be a much lower percentage. And the truth is, it's very difficult to have it both ways. If people are, in fact, being held accountable, then you would also expect a higher level of people agreeing that people deal with poor performers. So you can see that this whole idea of accountability really does matter and drives business results overall. So let's talk a little bit about why managers may not hold people accountable. What are some of the things that get in the way? What are some of the excuses they make? And we refer to these as the 7 tickets to slide. The 7 excuses. And the first one is, it'll get better if I just wait it out. You know, maybe this is just a one-off. It won't happen again. They're usually doing a fine job. I don't really have to have a conversation about this. I'll just wait and see what happens with this going forward. The second is that it's obvious that I was dissatisfied. I've used my I'm very dissatisfied voice, so they know that clearly that behavior and that performance is unacceptable. But unfortunately, sending an indirect message or a subtle signal may not necessarily really clarify what needs to happen differently. The feeling that it's not worth arguing over, or the concern that you'll have a conflict or a disagreement, and we'd like to avoid that kind of confrontation and just decide to let it go. The fourth is your team really knows what you expect, but the fact is you may not have clarified what good looks like and what the standard of performance should be. Meaning the baseline of clear expectations has not actually been set for people. And the concern about not wanting to lose your top performers, the feeling that you might kind of break their rhythm or break their momentum, and you may be inclined to give top performers a little bit more leeway, because they are doing so well. So if they're not covering everything, the other things they're doing are particularly good. So your top salespeople, if they don't want to do paperwork, maybe that's okay because you don't want to lose them and you want to keep their focus on sales. The sixth one is one of the greatest concerns of managers is the fear of being a micromanager and the equating following up and monitoring progress with micromanaging and being feared of being labeled negatively. And in this, today's world of collaborative collegial leadership, the idea of follow-up and monitoring tends to fall by the wayside, and we're so concerned of being seen as a micromanager that we really do step back to a great extent. And the last is the greatest manager myth of all time: it's easier if I do it myself. And unfortunately, if someone misses a deadline or misses an accountability, we tend to take it on ourselves, and really what we end up doing is becoming complicit in this cycle of poor performance and lack of accountability by basically reinforcing and sending the message, it's okay, I'll just do it myself anyway. They just take a low profile till things blow over, and it's back to business as usual. So here's the thing about this notion of when there is a lack of accountability. There are three key outcomes in terms of the impact overall, and two of them are fairly obvious. One is the low productivity, which I think is pretty straightforward. If everyone is not pulling their load in general, that the productivity of the group decreases. The second is around the punishment of top performers, which might be a little bit more subtle. And here, when someone else drops the ball, does not fulfill their commitment, what we do is, if we don't take it on ourselves, we hand it off to somebody who we trust, somebody who we believe can get the job done. And unfortunately, what we're doing there is we're punishing our top performers. People who tend to work well, we give them more work because we believe they can get it done. The people who miss deadlines and don't take accountability, we tend to let them slide a little bit. So inadvertently, we're setting up a situation where your top performers will start saying, and why am I working so hard? And what are you doing about this other person? Why aren't you taking action? And that leads us to the third outcome. And for me, this is the one that really had the greatest impact on me personally when I was leading a team of about 55 people. And you know, the idea of dealing with poor performers or holding people accountable or breaking people's rhythm and momentum when they were doing other things so well, what finally dawned on me is that by not taking action on these poorer performers or people who were not carrying their full load, it really did impact how the rest of the team saw me. They saw me as someone who either had a double standard, who was not willing to have a difficult conversation, who didn't treat people fairly and equitably. And that was a thing that really helped sort of push me forward to say, even if it's an uncomfortable conversation, even if it's a potentially stressful conversation, this is something that needs to be done, even if only for that reason, as well as productivity and the sense of fairness and equity. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by accountability. And as you can see, this idea of accountability is around everybody pulling their load, doing their full share. In a team situation, this becomes especially critical, that everybody does their full job. And when we talk about accountability in general, the classic definition is about accepting responsibility, admitting mistakes, and not blaming other people. And this is actually quite true. And a big part of taking accountability is not pointing fingers or making excuses. However, when people are operating with a significantly high level of accountability, that also looks like taking initiative. Even when it's not your fault or not your problem, people with high levels of accountability, high levels of responsibility will act in a proactive way that looks like taking initiative, which is where you're trying to go with this overall. So in order to recognize the level of accountability, there's put together a brief accountability scale that goes from a -2, which is absolutely no accountability, to a -1, which is acknowledges their responsibility but deflects it off on other people, to a +1, where they accept full responsibility for their actions, but they'd like you to understand the contributing factors, to a +2, where they accept responsibility for actions and for the impact of their actions. So for the +2, the primary focus is on actions and consequences. The typical kinds of language, the way people talk in general is, you know, I took those actions and I am responsible for the outcomes of my actions, and there's no fear. There's a total acceptance of the overall consequences and thoughts toward directing action toward them. On the +1, the primary focus is on acting accountably and acknowledging accountability, but explaining the influencing factors. So for instance, their language would be, yes, I did do those things, and here are some of the factors that influence the situation. So again, this is more directed toward problem solving as opposed to deflecting responsibility. And their thoughts, feelings are around accepting responsibility, but wanting others to understand the contributing factors with an intent towards resolving the issue. As you move into the negative side, the -1, here the focus is on deflecting responsibility. They may acknowledge that they did something or did not do something, but they have a number of excuses to explain why. They demonstrate frustration with others who might have dropped the ball, or they rationalize their own accountability. And on the -2, the lowest level, this is all about blame and denial. There's no acknowledgement at all about what their responsibility is or what they were accountable for doing, and they generally demonstrate extreme defensiveness. So let's take a look at a couple of cases to give you a chance to try to work with that scale. And this is the first case study with Rhonda. And Rhonda is a sales associate for a company that sells talent analytics software. Rhonda works from home and has been trying to close on what would be the biggest sale of the year for her. As Rhonda starts her workday, she gets an email from the prospect who tells her that they decided to go with another vendor. A few hours later, Rhonda's boss calls and asks if she heard from the prospect. She said she just got the email and the prospect selected another provider. Her boss doesn't say anything. Rhonda acknowledges that it was her job to get the sale, but blames the development group for not setting the demo up correctly and the finance department for not getting back to her promptly about the discount requested by the prospect. So let's take a look and see how you would rate Rhonda's level of accountability. And I'll open up a polling question. Would you rate her a +2, accepting responsibility for actions and impact? Would you rate her a +1, accepting responsibility for her actions? Would you move her to a -1 about deflecting responsibility, or a -2, taking no accountability? Let's get a few more. We have about half the votes. We'll take a few more minutes. All right. All right, why don't we close the poll? There's about 65% of the folks who responded there. And it looks like about 84% identified Rhonda as -1, acknowledging some responsibility but deflecting. A few people picked absolutely no accountability. In this particular case, Rhonda does verbally say, it's my responsibility, but she clearly is focusing blame on other people, which would put her more solidly in the -1. Now again, this exercise and this scale is really more about having a language to talk about people's level of accountability. It's not actually scientific. We have a couple people that put her up in the +1, where she was accepting responsibility, and I think we had a few people who put her up in the +2. So a lot of this has to do with how you see it and how you interpret it. But in general, most groups identify Rhonda as a -1. Let's take a look at another case. And this is with Cheryl. During a team meeting, each manager provides an update on his or her coaching activity. When it's Cheryl's turn, she says, I committed to meet with each of my direct reports at least twice a quarter, but I didn't do it last quarter. My manager's manager put me on this special project which required extensive travel in Asia. When I'm away from my office, time difference makes it difficult to schedule coaching calls. It's just a scheduling problem I ran into. I commit to rearranging my schedule and leveraging technology to get my coaching schedule back on track by the end of the week. I will also make up the coaching sessions I missed. So let's open up the poll and see how would you rate Cheryl's level of accountability in this particular situation. All right, so that new poll is open. And okay, great, we have a quick response right away. All right, we have about Great, that's 70%. Well, we'll close it right there. That's about 72% or so. Let's see what we have. All right, so quite a few people, half of you, rated her a +2, responsibility for actions and impact. Close second is a +1 on accountability for actions. And then we had a few in the minus area. In general, most people would rate Cheryl on the plus side in terms of either a +1 or a +2. Most of the time, people would put her as a +1 because she's accepting responsibility, but she wanted to explain some of the reasons about what was contributing factors. However, those of you that rated it a +2, I think that makes sense because she really did talk about what she was going to do, what immediate action she was going to take to resolve this issue with a high level of commitment. Some of it depends on how you read the text. Do you hear her speak with a high level of commitment, or do you hear her reading it with a sure, I'll just take care of it? Most people put her in a +1, but the +2 I think makes a great deal of sense as well. Let's take a look at some of the reasons. We'll move to the slide deck and take a look at some of the reasons why people don't take responsibility. Again, you might ask yourself, well, why doesn't everybody just step up when they need to and take accountability for mistakes that are made or admit when they don't do something or when they drop the ball? Well, there's three key factors. One of them has to do with this preserving self-image. We all have a belief of our capability and see ourselves a certain way, and we also want others to see us that way as well. So rather than admit that we lack confidence in some area or that we've made a mistake, it's easier for us in terms of preserving self-image to say something like, rather than say, well, I'm just not a very good project manager, I just really can't seem to handle that complexity, we would say something like, we would have hit all the milestones, but that other group didn't give us what we needed, and it caused us to miss our deadline. And that's more about preserving self-image. The second is social loafing, which is I find a fascinating concept. What we find is that when people don't believe that others can connect their behavior, their contribution, their action to the ultimate outcome, they tend to have put in lower effort and take less accountability. So the study, just one study where that comes from, is they took a look at swimmers on swimming teams, and what they find is that when you swim individual medley, you swim faster than when you're in a 4-person relay. Also, they found that when you call out the times of each person's lap so they can hear it and other people can hear it, they tend to swim faster than when you don't do that. So when people believe that there's an expectation for their performance and they believe that their effort can be connected to the final outcome, they tend to put in higher levels of effort, take more accountability, and the reverse is true. Locus of control is on a continuum. People have either an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. There are some people who believe that the internal locus of control is that we control our world. My actions, my decisions tend to determine the course of my life. An external locus of control is people believe that it's all external factors. It's the economy, it's the weather, it's other people. It has very little to do with what I do in terms of how my life runs and the course of my decisions. So depending on where you fall on that continuum, that may impact your ability and willingness to take responsibility. So what can leaders do about this in terms of setting clear expectations for performance? Many of you may be familiar with the Pygmalion effect. It's a concept that's been around for literally decades. It started with, it's based on a Greek myth where a sculptor made a statue, fell in love with the statue, the gods took pity on him and brought the sculpture to life. The movie My Fair Lady was also based on that story, where a professor was challenged or bet that he could take a street urchin and turn her into a great lady. So the idea here is that expectations drive performance. And let's talk a little bit about what that means, because here, positive expectations and setting those expectations high drive confidence, increase effort, persistence, and improve performance, where negative expectations tend to have the opposite effect. But where did this idea come from? So just a quick summary on the study. The study, this was several decades ago. The first study was in an elementary school with fourth grade teachers, and they basically told the fourth grade teacher that her children were tested and that half of the class were identified as late bloomers, and that over the course of the year they would learn, they would grow, they would become just excellent students. The other half of the group were just normal children, no problems, nothing at all. They would just be normal children going through the course of their education. At the end of the year, when they tested the children again, all the kids that the teacher was told were late bloomers ended up doing better than the children who the teacher was told were just regular kids. Now, the punchline, for some of you who don't know the story, the punchline is that there are actually no difference between the children. The only difference was in the teacher's head, right? The teacher had an expectation that some children would do better than others, and for some reason, in some magical way, those children actually did do better. So what is actually going on here? Is it just sort of a mind meld where I expect you to do better and then you do better? What we found, and there were additional studies after that, and there were actually hundreds and hundreds of studies, but one individual wanted to understand exactly what leaders are doing that's different. And what they found is that there are 5 leadership practices. When you have high expectations, when you believe people are competent, leaders tend to do 5 things. They enhance and maintain self-esteem, they set challenging goals, they create a supportive environment, they provide recognition and catch people doing something right, and they provide constructive feedback. And this package seems to be the 5 things that drive high levels of performance. So when this study was done, and I think his name was Dove, D-O-V, he figured he had the secret sauce. So he started to train managers. He figured if I could train leaders to do these 5 things, I would solve all the performance problems. However, it was a total failure, because what they found is that once we frame someone as either a poor performer or in some way deficient, it's very difficult for us to pretend that they in fact are a good performer or that we have a high expectation. So basically what happens, we frame someone as either as a high performer or as a low performer, and then our behavior tends to follow suit. So in order to make this shift, we as leaders need to break that cycle. How can you break the cycle and start to, the people who are having difficulty and struggling are the ones that really need that positive attention. What can you do to be able to shift your perspective and in a genuine, authentic way treat them as if they've got the potential and use those 5 behaviors? The first is to assume value. You need to focus on the positives. So in someone's performance overall, rather than thinking about what it is they did wrong, to really focus on both a balance of what it was they did well and what your concerns are. So again, when we look at a top performer, and they make a mistake, our view is, hey, that's a learning experience. They'll bounce back from that right away. Somebody who has a history of not being a particularly good performer, when we see them make a mistake, it's just, yeah, they did it again. They can't seem to get out of their own way. So our job is to really focus on the positives, right? And when we're giving feedback, to be more balanced, right? Talk about what you like about the idea and reinforce those strengths and put your concerns in an actionable form. So rather than say, we just can't do what you're suggesting, to say, how can we do what you're suggesting and still maintain our budget or still maintain our deadline? The next is to start with a strength. One of the problems is you want to have confidence that the person can in fact make that stretch and take on the new accountability and be successful. So you want to focus on what the person currently does well, and then from that point, set a modest stretch goal. Now, again, if you can't find anything the person does well, you've got a different problem on your hands. But start with something that's a strength for them. Just stretch them a little bit. In that way, you would be able to provide coaching and support in a genuine way, in an authentic way, as this person tries to take some risks and tries to do something new to move forward. And you want to make the unconscious conscious. Think about these 5 things, because these 5 things in all the studies were being done unconsciously. In a lot of ways, the leader, the teacher, the lieutenant of the platoon did not realize or did not intentionally use these 5 behaviors. They did it in a sort of more automatic way as they were engaging with someone who they thought had real potential. So what we need to do is to keep these 5 things top of mind, and then by focusing on the positives and starting with the strengths, we can deliver these in a much more authentic manner. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the tools that you can use to help manage accountability. But before I do that, let's take a look at this particular situation and see how you would handle it. So through your efforts to understand the reasons for your team's performance plateau, it's come to your attention that David has been consistently missing deadlines. He recently missed 2 important deadlines, which caused a delay in the product release. So David's performance is negatively impacting the team. You need to take some action. Now, David does not report directly to you. He's on your team, and he's a dedicated member of your team, but he reports to Pamela Jones, who is your colleague. So now here are 5 choices. All of these choices are good choices, right? They all have real potential. I want you to think about which one you would take. What would you do to handle this particular situation and manage accountability with David? So we'll open up that polling question and give you a chance to think a little bit about how you would manage this particular situation. All right, so the votes are starting to come in. We have about 30%. We have an interesting pattern that's forming. All right, I'll just give it a few more moments, get a few more votes in there. Let's see if we can get it up to at least 70%. Okay, why don't we close it down now? Let's see what we have. All right, so it looks like it's most of the people pick D, clarify expectations. We had a few people talk about going to David's boss, and a few people on the emails. Let's kind of go through each one of them. Calling David's boss is definitely something you would want to do somewhere in this process, but it might not be the thing you would lead with. David is your responsibility. David, your responsibility. So to put it off on Pamela might be a little bit, of you not taking accountability overall. A few people pick send David an email. The problem with sending him an email, although it really is very impersonal, and there's a real opportunity for misunderstandings overall. And then on E, a few people pick that as well. The team meeting is not a bad way to do it. The problem with the team meeting is that it's too dissipated across the group. David might not even get that you're talking to him, and the rest of the team might wonder why you're talking to them, because they're not having a problem with deadlines. So C and D are the 2 best answers, and in this case, D is really, really good. Clarify your expectations for David's performance, his current projects, agree on check-ins, and discuss progress and anticipate problems is great. It's something you would definitely do on the front end, right? Now, C is just a little bit better. Those of you who pick C. C and D as a combination are fantastic. C is a little bit better, and the reason why C is a little better is because David has currently missed some deadlines, and C is about him taking accountability right now to get things back on track. D, again, is a great thing to do going forward or something you would have done on the back end, but C is about taking accountability right now. So there are 4 accountability busters, 4 mistakes people tend to make when they are managing the accountability of others. One is that they talk about ideas, but they don't agree on actions, accountability by people's names, and then everybody assumes that someone else is going to do the work, falls through the cracks. The second is they may agree on the action, but they don't necessarily discuss a completion date. So the end date is open to interpretation and differing opinions, and it's opportunities for misunderstandings. The third is you wait until the completion date to check on the results, and this is that fear of micromanaging, or you might not even check at all. You know, busy life, lot going on, you might not even follow up. And the fourth is not holding people accountable for missed commitments after the fact, and that would be either handing it off to one of your top performers or taking it on yourself overall. So let's take a look at the first tool. What can you do to set people up for success? And here we're talking about the ATC model. The first is action. Be clear about your expectations and what you want people to do. So it's not just the task, but it's also what good looks like. One of our concerns about confronting people constructively when they miss a deadline is based on the fact that we're concerned we have not been clear about expectations. But if you've been clear about what you expect and you've been clear about the timeline when it's due, you have a much more solid foundation to discuss what was expected and why it did not happen, right? So these 2 components are critical in order to help people succeed and to enable you to have a constructive conversation about it. The third component are checkpoints. This is setting up key milestones to be able to meet with people to talk about progress. Now, the importance of these checkpoints, and it's a very simple technique, but one benefit is that it combines the coaching aspect and the project management aspect. So many leaders say, I just don't have time to coach, I don't have time to, but this is a way to combine coaching with the management of the project. It's also a way to have check-ins and course corrections before you get to the deadline so that you can take those actions and increase the likelihood that you'll be able to achieve the intended outcome. It's also an opportunity to provide recognition for aspects of the work that are being done well. And this goes back to this notion of maintaining and enhancing self-esteem overall. So the first tool is the ATC model. Think of it as air traffic control, helping someone come in for a safe landing. Now, despite the fact that you are clear about expectations, are clear about time frames, and meet with people periodically to talk about progress and make course corrections, people may in fact drop the ball. So there are 3 accountability questions, and frequently managing accountability is and looks a lot like a coaching intervention. So there are 3 key questions. The past, you'd ask them, or looking back, what could you have done to prevent the problem? What might you have done that contributed to the problem? In the present, which is the key question, what can you do right now to get things back on track? Not that you're going to take it, not that, hey, how can I help you, but really, what are you going to do to make this happen? And the future question is also critical. What can you do to prevent this problem from happening again? Now, the key to this question and the future-oriented aspect is people will make excuses. And again, you know, they'll say, I couldn't do it, they didn't give me the information, I didn't have what I needed. And it sounds like an excuse, and it feels like an excuse, but it also might be true. The key here is to get people focused on what are they going to do about it. Because if it is true, and it is excuse or not, if something isn't done, that's going to happen again, and we're going to find ourselves having the same conversation in the future. So what will you do to increase the likelihood that the things you need will be available, the people you need will be do what they need to do to get what you need. This is all about working effectively across organizational boundaries. Now, when you're doing this, you might start with the present question and then move to the future and do the past question last, because that might create a little bit of defensiveness and might sound a little accusatory. But the present and the future question are much more problem-solving oriented. So let me talk a little bit about some tips and best practices, and then we'll open it up for some questions. The key is to be a role model by holding yourself accountable, but it's also about being aware of the language you use. When you talk about other groups or other people and what they did or did not do, are you in fact modeling, in a subtle way about blaming others or not taking full responsibility? It's helpful to use that the accountability rating scale to evaluate the level of accountability of your direct reports, and then you can use the 3 reasons why people don't take accountability to identify probable causes. Also, your use of the ATC model and the extent to which you do those 3 things, clear about expectations, clear about timeframes, periodic check-ins, might also impact the level of accountability of your employees. So again, it's not just about them. It's also about the way in which you engage and work with them, especially if they may not be your consistent top performers, to be able to focus on the people who need your help and coaching the most. You want to enable honest, open communication about problems. You want people to be comfortable coming forward with concerns before it's too late. Now again, some people will wait as long as they can before they bring an issue forward, hoping that they can fix it or hoping that it'll work itself out. And sometimes by the time they do come forward, you don't have enough runway to be able to address the situation. So you want to make it possible and make it the norm where people come forward with potential problems, come forward with concerns before it's too late to be able to resolve them. And that, by the way, is definitely based on the leader's behavior. When you are open to these concerns and you don't, what they call, kill the messenger, you increase the likelihood that people will come forward. You want to set people up for success by using that ATC model to be deliberate and conscientious about those 3 parts. Be clear about what you want and what good looks like. Be specific about the time frame. Even saying something like Wednesday is a problem. And we might say, as soon as you can, because, we know people are busy and we're trying to be understanding. But we don't mean as soon as you can. We mean I need it Wednesday, right? But you also need to say, I need it Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Because, you might come and say, is it ready? And they say, well, I got 3 more hours. So if you're not specific, you just set yourself up for these kinds of issues. And if you are clear and the person is unable to do it, problem solve it in the moment. The use of action plans is a key tool for managing accountability. Many of you may not take advantage of this. It tends to be a highly underutilized tool. But action plans, even a low-tech version in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, basically the action plan documents agreements. Who's going to do what and when are they going to do it? And when you post these action plans for everyone to see and increasing transparency, it not only clarifies what I'm supposed to do so I can better manage my time and that you can better manage our periodic check-ins, but it also gets at this idea of social loafing. Now everybody knows what I'm supposed to be doing and when I'm supposed to be doing it, and because of that, I tend to put in a lot more effort and get much more focused on delivering results. The 3 accountability questions are great for you to use, especially during your check-ins with people to help them make the course correction. What you really want to do is encourage them to ask themselves these 3 accountability questions as they run into obstacles and roadblocks along the way as well. And what you'd like to do is encourage what else can I do to achieve results attitude. You want to create the the desire and make it possible for people to both be proactive, to take initiative, and to put in maximum effort. So everyone, thank you. That's it for the formal part of our presentation. We have some time for questions, if any of you have, and I'll turn it back over to Sarah to help manage that part. Sarah?
All right, great. Thank you so much, Rick. That was awesome. So Rick's contact information is on that slide right now. So you can go ahead and get in touch with him after the session if you have any questions. And we do have some time to answer some live questions now. So attendees, go ahead and submit those to me. And while we wait, let me share just one more way you can gain a little bit more knowledge about today's topic. And you can use the accountability experience combines a self-assessment and a one-day workshop to allow employees to feel more in control of outcomes and improve key relationships. And then for a limited time, we are offering a 25% discount on any accountability experience product. And you will receive that coupon code in your email after this session. And then also, if anybody's interested, we're doing a very, very short product review after this session. So if you want to stick around for that, that'd be awesome. So we do have a number of questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and open this up. The first question is coming from Mark. How can I use the 3 reasons people make excuses to help me better manage accountability in others?
Right, well, I think I mean to help them manage the accountability of their teams as well. Is that what you mean?
How can I use the 3 reasons people make excuses to help me better manage accountability in others?
Okay, well, I'll just take it at face value. The key thing is that when you use those questions, what you're really doing is causing people to think a little bit about what they can do differently, rather than just solving the problem for them, or rather than just saying how here's what you're supposed to do or here's what you should have done. What you're able to do now is use these 3 questions to really require them to think a little bit about what they can do to get things back on track, what they can do to keep this from happening again, and what they have done to contribute to this problem overall, and what they might do differently. So it really is making it a coaching conversation rather than just telling them what to do overall. And hopefully I got the meaning of your question there.
All right, perfect, thanks. Next question is coming from Adam. If we know which leader behaviors have the greatest impact on a direct report's confidence and performance, why don't all leaders consistently use them?
Yeah, I alluded to that a little bit in the presentation. I mean, the key here is that, and it seems to be a human nature thing, once we frame someone as, in a negative way, either as a poor performer or someone that is not as competent as others, it's very difficult for us to change our perception of them. I think I gave the example of when someone says, a top performer who screws something up, who makes a mistake, we put that in they'll learn from that box, and we don't tend to get too concerned about it, just because we assume that they're competent and will, move things forward. But someone who we believe is not competent, when they make a mistake, we just assume that they just continue to screw up. And if they do well, it was like lucky, they just sort of fell into it. So the whole challenge is to be able to, break that cycle and see people in a genuine, authentic way, frame them differently, to be able to help them to continue to learn and develop overall. And that's one of the most difficult things. It appears it's difficult because we know what those 5 things are leaders should do. We just have trouble doing them with everyone on the team. We can do it easily with people who we believe are competent. We just have problems doing it with people who are not as competent.
All right, great, thanks. Our next question is coming from Alan. Holding employees accountable often involves confidential management action. Do you have any advice about how to let other employees know that something is being done without violating this?
Yeah, and I think if I understand that, that's kind of getting to the, when you're giving someone feedback or coaching, that's supposed to be done in private. I think some of it depends on what it is that they have not been accountable for. You know, and you may be able to talk more in general, but I think, again, you know, you can't say to people, well, I've spoken to him or I'm giving him feedback in front of everyone. But, you know, as the leader, I think it's important to help people understand that action is being taken. You may not necessarily go into the details. But again, people can also see, you know, how you treat people, how you work with people, if you're being consistent, fair, and equitable across the group. People tend, just like they can see when you're not managing accountability and they believe people are getting away with things, they can also observe when you are holding people accountable and expecting them to perform to standard overall. So you may not even have to do anything particularly explicit. You can, you know, people can just observe your behavior and interaction with them.
All right, great, thank you. Our next question is coming from Nahid. Any tips to manage or increase accountability of peers as a non-manager to an individual or to a group?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. The three accountability questions work really well. As a matter of fact, the ATC model and the three accountability questions work very well with colleagues and peers, just as they do with direct reports. Because sitting in a, let's say, a cross-functional team with colleagues, you can still facilitate the conversation about being clear about what the expectations are, being specific about the time frames, and agreeing with them, mutually agreeing on when the check-in should be, right? And then using that as an opportunity for the discussion. Now, again, the tone of the conversation might be a little bit different if they're not a direct report, but not too much different, because you're trying to, again, be collaborative and collegial in terms of how you're trying to problem solve. The three coaching questions are also appropriate. It's not inappropriate to ask a colleague, you know, what are you going to do right now, you know, to get things back on track, and what can we do in the future to keep this from happening again, and to explore what contributed to this. So these three questions and the ATC model can work beautifully across organizational boundaries with colleagues and peers.
All right, great, thank you. Looks like our next question is coming from Nurali. Do you notice the higher you go up in the career ladder, there is less accountability?
No, actually, I noticed the opposite. It's there tends to be more accountability, but see, again, some of it may be dependent on how you define it. As you move up in the organization, you need to be able to delegate more and get work done through other people. And I guess if something doesn't happen or doesn't go well, the extent to which is, do you, accept responsibility as the leader of your team, or do you throw people sort of under the bus and say, hey, it's their fault? So again, I don't think it's just related to the level that you have in the organization, but if you are going to be an effective leader, as you move up and have a broader span of control, you need to be able to delegate effectively, get work done through others, and enable people to be accountable. But you still may, be the final arbiter or be the final, the person who ultimately would be accountable. But it's about sharing it overall. So I don't think it gets less as it gets just because you're more senior in the organization.
All right, great, thank you. And our next question is coming from Jill. You mentioned 5 key competencies, of which managing accountability was one. Could you briefly mention the other 4?
Right, there are, actually there are 10 factors. 5 of them are prerequisites, and the 5 that are prerequisites, even companies that are not very good at execution have those things in place. So the prerequisites are like a clear vision, a feasible, realistic strategy, high quality products and services, a highly engaged workforce. Those are things people, even if you're not good at execution, we get that we need those things. But the 5 things that really differentiated the companies that were most effective at execution were managing accountability, which is the expecting and getting top performance. The facilitating change readiness was the second. Most aspects of execution, there's some change or difference required, and your ability to prepare people for change and to facilitate their readiness through change was a key differentiator. Working across organizational boundaries was the third, both on cross-functional teams, but to be able to coordinate and collaborate across the organization. The fourth one was leader behavior, consistent with organizational goals and values, and that's one of those ones where you go, that's like mom and apple pie, where you go, what's the big deal? It's one of those factors that you don't see the impact until it's not there. So, for instance, let's say Volkswagen more recently with the emissions, with the leader, they espouse value around clean energy and clean environment, yet leader behavior seems to be totally inconsistent with that. Now, normally that wouldn't come to, you wouldn't see that, but when it's not aligned, it really becomes clear how important that is. And the third has to do with making high-quality decisions, critical thinking, focusing particularly on involving people in decisions that affect them to improve decision quality and improve decision acceptance. And we run through all those factors in my book, Closing the Execution Gap, which is available on Amazon.com. And thank you for asking that question.
All right, I think we have time just for one more question. I know there's a few more, but we're getting close to 3 o'clock. But the last question that we will do is coming from Cheryl. If a leader has already earned a reputation among the employees as being poor at managing accountability, what is the best approach to turn that attitude around?
Yeah. Well, again, not to oversimplify it, but I think in terms, for me, it would be the consistent change in behavior. So in other words, you can't just do it once and expect everybody to say, oh, hey, he's back, he's on board. You have to demonstrate that you are holding people consistently accountable, fairly and equitably across the team, and you need to do that on a regular basis over time. And as people start to see the consistency of the behavior, it will gradually change people's perception of you. But once or twice or sporadically and randomly won't necessarily change anyone's point of view. But I do think that you can come back. Just because you happen to be labeled as not managing accountability well doesn't mean that you're relegated to that label forever. There are specific tools, specific behaviors you can start to use. If you do them consistently over a period of time, people will start to see that that is a serious, legitimate change in your behavior.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Those were some great questions. If we did not get time to answer those questions today for you, you will receive an emailed response with Rick's answered questions probably about like mid-next week. So Rick, would you just like to add any final thoughts before I go ahead and then just wrap up the session then for today?
Yeah, thanks. No, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. I really appreciated the opportunity to speak with you. And I would just mention again, the idea of managing accountability is the one of 5 key differentiators for effective execution. And you can read a lot more about our study of 400 companies and what those factors are and specific leader behaviors to be able to close the execution gap in my book. And it's on Amazon. So thank you, and Sarah, thank you for the opportunity.
All right, great. Thanks, Rick, again. And a big thanks to our sponsors, the Negotiating Style Profile. And if your organization would be interested in sponsoring an HRDQ-U webinar, you can go ahead and reach out to me. My email is sschaefer@hrdq.com. So we appreciate your time, and we do hope you found today's webinar informative. And then for those interested, you can always join us for that about 3-minute product review with Chris Carniers from our customer service team, and he will share a little bit more information on the accountability experience.